So this is a series that I've put off making for a while. Ultimately, I'm not sure it's even worth the effort, because I'm not sure people can actually have this conversation, or conversations at this level, productively. The title of the video has probably given you a basic understanding of what this video is going to cover, but this is going to be part of a series that will hopefully cover much more complex subjects than the already complex subject of psychopathy. Now, to get right into it, I would say we need to discuss sociopathy as a stepping stone to reach psychopathy. Sociopathy is a physical disorder. It is marked by neurological damage or defect that causes someone to suffer empathetic function. They have a reduced or otherwise impaired ability to understand the emotions of others, specifically to feel the emotions of others. Logical understanding versus emotional feeling. As I said, this is usually, in 99% of instances, the result of actual damage to the brain. Maybe it's not 99%, but it's much more often. By much more often, I mean it is ever associated with neurological defect. Psychopathy, on the other hand, is a complete inability to emotionally feel what other people are feeling, to feel empathy. The brain is fully intact in the overwhelming majority of these cases, and even beyond that, they have a degree of artificial empathy, allegedly. This is discussed as mirroring, according to modern psychologists. Now, right out of the gate, we have a third option we need to discuss, actually. Extreme empathy disorder. It has many different classifications. Some don't consider it a disorder, but by every metric it is, because someone who has no ability to withhold empathy ultimately enters depressive spiral and has severe mental health consequences. There's a lot of suffering in the world, and if you are feeling that all as your own suffering, then it's generally not a good thing. So that is the opposite end of the spectrum. We have extreme empathy on one side, and we have psychopathy on the other, and then technically sociopathy would be somewhere in between the two, past the middle point, closer towards psychopathy. Now, the thing about this is outcomes are inconsistent with expectation. One of the things you may have heard is psychopaths tend to do quite well in life. Sociopaths have a severe impaired social development. They don't do well in any environment that requires social development. Their relationships struggle. They just all around have a lower outcome in life. Extreme empaths have a lower outcome in life. Psychopaths have the highest average outcome in life. They're happier in relationships. They are more productive in the workforce. They are able to rise to higher positions of power. They just all around outperform either of the other two classifications. The average healthy person, the person who has neither extreme empathy nor psychopathy designations, still does not perform as well as the psychopath, by a large margin. There's a reason that psychopaths hold most CEO positions and any position of power, really. They, through the ability to suppress their empathy, they're able to make very effective, pragmatic decision makers. Rather than acting out of fear or anger, they will tend to act out of pragmatic resolution. This is one of the things that causes some psychologists to have a major issue with psychopathy as a generally positive trait. I watched a interview with Jordan Peterson where he discussed the subject, and he said that psychopaths struggle in relationships. And by struggle in relationships, he said that psychopaths specifically have a higher rate of failure in their relationships than traditionally healthy people because they refuse to compromise. Due to their lack of empathetic function, they don't see the value in compromise that other people do. And this is a double-edged sword because psychopaths actually report some of the highest satisfaction in their relationships of any classification of people, though they do, in fact, go through many failed relationships to reach that point. Now, a simple example I can give you as to why that would not be a negative thing is imagine if you're served up a platter of food, all types of food you do not know anything about. You don't know how it tastes, you don't know how nutritious it is, all you know is the superficial value of that food looking at it. It either looks good or it does not look good. Now, if you were to pick a single piece of food from this platter, and that is the only thing you can eat for the rest of your life, there's a very good chance that you'll get something that you don't really like the flavor of, or it has poor nutritional value, something that is not good for you to be your sole dietary choice. Ultimately, the healthy thing would be to sample a wide selection of these foods and find something that both you enjoy the flavor of and gives you the nutrition you need to function at the level you want to function. Psychopaths have a luxury being highly successful in finance, highly successful in social interaction, of having a large selection of potential partners. Now, because of that, they are more likely to engage in a relationship and ultimately determine that that relationship is not suitable for them. And someone like Jordan Peterson says that since that relationship failed, it's actually the fault of the psychopath because the other person does not want the relationship to end. So it's the psychopath who determined to pursue short-term gain of lack of compromise and just find another relationship. Now, the irony is that preserving a relationship that does not satisfy your needs and your desires, a bit of both, is a short-term way of thinking. The long-term is that you're going to have to remain with this person if you want to preserve the relationship. And if in the short term you're already unhappy in that relationship, the long-term solution is actually to end the relationship. The short-term solution is to try to just manage the negative aspects of it. Now, obviously, managing the negative outcomes of a relationship is far inferior to being in a relationship where you don't feel the need to manage the negativity of the relationship. You just are happy with it. So it's a very strange position to take, where if one party in a breakup is unhappy, the party that is not unhappy with the outcome is actually the one that is at fault, effectively. They're doing something wrong. It makes sense if you look at it like the other person is unhappy due to the actions of the psychopath, but ultimately the psychopath has no obligation to preserve the happiness of another person at the expense of their own happiness. Empathy kind of suggests that you should do that, but people don't do that, psychopath or not. And that's a good segue into my interpretation of the disorder. As far as I can tell, I have talked to many experts. They are very intermittent. Some of them feel my idea is more likely to be correct. Others feel like they don't want to be associated with psychopaths. My solution is selective psychopathy. I coined this concept back in the early 2000s. It's now come around to be accepted in some circles. I would say some of the scientists I've talked to have, or not scientists, the medical experts I've talked to, I gave some speeches on this back in the past, have taken elements that they agreed with and incorporated them in a way that allows them to preserve their original education rather than incorporating new ideas. We call this a lack of compromise. Rather than accepting that their position is compromised, they instead opt to preserve their original understanding and only incorporate the new information in a way that supports what they already know. Confirmation bias and lack of compromise. You might even call it compromising, but in reality, it's only accepting what supports what you already believe. It's not really a compromise. Now, their interpretation of this has been that some people have selective psychopathy. If they do well in life, they have selective psychopathy, basically, because their career demands it. Doctors, lawyers, insurance people, anyone that basically makes money out of exploiting other people's negative outcomes. A doctor makes money from people being sick, so in a way, if they were being empathetic, they would treat people without payment. But obviously, it's about the money. You need to be paid, you want to be paid, and you're going to pursue action that results in you getting financial compensation, not feeling good. Because you feel good because of the money. My interpretation of selective psychopathy is actually just a foundational shift from the understanding of psychopathy. By my estimate, doctors in the past, due to the extreme behaviors of psychopaths, some psychopaths, wanted a disorder that would allow them to divest any blame that psychopath's actions from the greater humanity. They can say this person is clinically unwell, and that's why they did this, not because they're human. The problem is that psychopathy is visible in every level of humanity. Outside of the extreme empaths, people serve their own interests, and they do that directly in the face of empathy. They look at the homeless person on the side of the street and give them nothing. They rationalize how that's actually a good thing for the homeless person, even in a potentially fatal winter storm. They still leave the homeless person on the side of the street, potentially to freeze to death, because it's actually for their own good. Now, I'm not saying you should have to help anyone, or that you shouldn't, it's just that is a psychopathic behavior. You are looking at someone you should feel empathy for, because that's supposed to be the clinically healthy response, and you don't feel any empathy. Because it would be a burden on you to feel empathy for that person. The things that led me to this, ironically, are very low stakes, but when you look at the low stakes, you'll see how it applies to everything else. When I played video games, I would constantly see people who exploit others. Everyone is always exploiting everyone in a video game scenario. But it's just expected. It's not malicious exploitation, but it's for personal benefit. In MapleStory, you had a thing called marketers, or flippers, depending on which circles you were involved in. These people would buy items from people who went and played the game and grinded them, farmed out the item. They would buy them at a severe markdown. And then they would immediately just, in the same exact spot, turn around and sell them for 30-40% profit. And if you ask them about that and said, why do you do this? Isn't it unfair to the people that you're buying the item below market value? They would say something along the lines of, no, I'm offering a service. I mean, most of them. There's some that would just openly admit what they were doing was exploiting other people's lack of knowledge of the game. And sucks to suck, know more about the game, loser. But a lot of them would tell you, no, I'm providing a service. These people don't want to sit in the channel trying to sell their item for the full value. They're happy to take a little bit of money and go home. Now, to keep this in perspective, everyone in this conversation knows that these items take hours to obtain and that they can be sold at the full value in minutes. So, time valuation, that already doesn't hold up to logic. So, They'll tell you something like that. And then they'll use the argument of, like, what I'm doing is providing them a service to sell the item for a fee, 30 to 40%. It's actually 20 to 40%. There's a wide range of how many. There's a lot of flippers, and there's a wide range of how much money they're making every time they flip an item. Either way, they're making a large sum of money at the expense of someone else's ignorance. And they would tell you that, it's a service, and then in the same conversations with those people, I would watch them interact with people they're buying and selling items to. And in both situations, they will convince the seller that the item is actually only worth what they're offering. And then they will convince the buyer that the item is actually worth what they're demanding. They will lie in both scenarios. They will tell the buyer that they've bought a dozen of these items in the last hour, and that's what they sell for. And then or the seller, and when they're buying or when they're selling the item, they will then tell the other person, oh, like, I bought this at 5% below what I'm asking you for, so I really can't go below that, or else I'm only breaking even. And then they might agree to break even to help out the other person, when in reality they're making considerable profit. Deception is part of the human condition. When you're using deception, it entails that you understand that your behavior would not be accepted otherwise. That you have a lower rate of success at whatever you're doing with honesty. So, ultimately, that shows that they know what they're doing would be frowned on. They frame it in a way to themselves that allows them to be a neutral entity to themselves or to others that are examining. And the reality doesn't really matter to them. If you point out that they're lying, they will, oh, that's just bartering. That's just how you negotiate a deal. It's not malicious, it's just the way it works. Things are the way they are, and I am simply existing in that scenario. Now, the thing is, psychopaths will use the same exact explanation. They didn't make the game, they didn't build reality and society. They are simply existing in it. It's not their place to change the rules to make them better for everyone. They are just doing their part in playing the game. There's a degree of separation in both. And when you expand that, go ahead and extrapolate that up to more real-world examples. Lawyers. Lawyers will tell you they offer an invaluable service. That, law and order is good, and in order for law and order to exist, they need to do their job. Now, when you actually get to the brass tacks of what a lawyer does, they either A, happily represent a client that is guilty and try to get them found not guilty, or B, they do the good thing and they represent clients who are actually not guilty and try to get them justice. They're either trying to manipulate justice or trying to get justice. And even if they're trying to get justice, what they're doing is leveraging their skill and their ability to get someone justice for profit. Oh, you're innocent? Well, if you want me to prove that you're innocent, you're going to have to pay me. Exploiting someone's negative circumstance. I already mentioned doctors are exploiting negative health. That's just a fact. There's, some doctors don't like to frame it that way, but that is how it works. And in a way, the medical system at large profits from people continuously getting ill. They want to see return customers. And that's why you see so much medicine that makes people permanently dependent on getting that medicine forever. I mean, call it a drug addiction, call it a prescription, the outcome is the same. So, these people have that psychopathic tendency, the ability to rationalize negative action as essential or simply what is done. It's just the way the world works. Look at military. They put a gun in your hand, they point you at an enemy, and they say, shoot that person. Kill them. You kill them, and look at how the soldiers react. They're not overcome with grief over taking a human life. They are celebrating that the enemy is dead. That's pretty psychopathic. It's actually sadistic as well, which we'll cover sadism and masochism later on, assuming I continue this video series. You look at insurance companies. Let me put on my best mafioso accent. Be a nice... hold on. Let me get it. It's a nice buddy you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. Offer me a little money and I'll be sure to step up in case anything were to unfortunately happen to that body of yours. And then you go ahead and you pay for your insurance, and then the insurance company, after they get your money, turns around and goes, oh yeah, that guy, how much does he need? Oh, hell no. Just go ahead and put him on this drug that'll keep him on life support for the rest of his life. He'll need the pill forever. We can offer this treatment. Nah. He hasn't put that much money into his plan. We gotta make our money. Like, it's all, everywhere you look, you're always leveraging your own interests against the well-being of others. Because people tend to, they're either doing something that's good for their well-being, or they're doing something that's bad for their well-being, and you are profiting from it either way. No matter how you cut it, you're trying to make your money. You could be selling them something that's bad for them, or selling them something that's good for them. Either way, you're convincing them to give you more money than it's worth. Because that's how you make your money. You need an excess above what you are paying, or what you are paying. So, when you accept that, when you look at that and you just say that is reality, what a psychopath is doing is just being better at the game. Now, what about not being able to empathize in relationships? That's just not true. There could be some psychopaths out there that have neurological damage that impair their empathetic ability, but on average, because of their outcomes and general ability in relationships, what is necessary for a relationship to do well long term, it's not that they don't have the ability to empathize. They have a selective ability to empathize. What other people do unconsciously, they unconsciously justify doing bad things to good people and doing good things for bad people when it benefits them. A psychopath just does that more actively. Either they do it more actively or they're more aggressive in the way that they do it. And that's not exactly a negative. That's just, again, being good at the game. They are good at being human. The relationship thing is just blatantly not true. The mirroring, the ability to mirror the emotions of others in such a way that they're able to exploit someone else's emotions for their benefit, like having a successful relationship with someone where both parties are happy. You know, exploiting someone's emotions, I guess. That's just empathy. It's not some magical superpower that they can use logic to produce emotion. It's that they use logic to determine when emotion is valuable and when it's not. That's a much simpler explanation that doesn't require magical thinking. And many times, when society feels like the standards are, you need to have empathy here, they just say, no, that's not the way it works. You say, oh, you're a doctor, you're supposed to help people. You're a lawyer, you're supposed to protect people from wrongful punishment. Yeah, if I'm paid. If I get the money that's worth my time, I do that. And the lawyers, I'll represent the guilty people if they pay me enough. Like, that's the way that the system works. And the psychopath accepts that. So, in a sense, the spectrum of empathy to psychopathy, it's one of the things that people also forget. Spectrum of ideas requires extremes. There must be an extreme of both options. And then somewhere in between is where most people are going to line up. In that spectrum of psychopathy, of empathetic activity or regulation, people are basically organized by intelligence. Both emotional intelligence, which I don't like the idea of emotional intelligence as a designation, because it's not really intelligence. It is a type of intelligence, but it's different from what most people associate with intelligence. It's much more like wisdom. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand the emotions both of others and yourself, and understand what actions produce what outcomes. So a psychopath's ability to be like, okay, if I get this, I am happy, and if I get this, I am sad, that's a measurement of emotional intelligence. Again, it's more wisdom than intelligence. It is obtained through both a mixture of just logical understanding as well as experience that gives you a large pool of information to work with, and eventually you'll be able to recognize your own patterns. But you also can use that to interpret other people, and that's where it becomes a true form of intelligence. Your ability to read other people's emotions is a purely analytical and logical ability. You can read their circumstance, you can understand how that would give them a different interpretation of events, and then you know how to utilize that to your advantage. That is purely mathematical. It is scientific. It is a process without the need for emotional interaction at all. However, we have a portion of our brain dedicated to that function. And it's specifically dedicated to, ironically enough, mirroring the emotion of others. The amygdala and a few other parts of the brain being what I'm talking about in this. And basically that means what that part of the brain does when you activate it. And this is a thing, it's a conscious, unconscious part of the brain. It's a lot like emotion in general. You can regulate your emotions naturally. You can choose to suppress and control your emotions. Like if you get very angry, you don't immediately just start throwing punches. You can process that and determine the best way to allow yourself to disperse that negative emotional energy. Emotional awareness is the same way. Those parts of your brain allow you to see someone who is crying, reflect a portion of that negative emotion onto yourself, and then when you are putting yourself in that position where you feel bad, you feel like crying or you feel sad, you will then be able to lower yourself to their level and help them to feel better. Because you have more of an understanding of where they currently at, whereas if you look at someone who's crying, you just say, why don't you just stop crying and be happy instead? It doesn't really do you any good. A logical solution to an emotional problem is not always, it can sometimes be a good solution, but it's not always a good solution. Usually you need to have that emotional equilibrium between both parties. Both parties need to understand the cause of the sadness to a degree and the depth of the sadness in order to find a resolution to that sadness. The same thing with anger, with any other negative emotion that we will tend to want to offset. The important part of that is what you're doing is mirroring the emotion. You're not actually feeling the other person's emotion. If someone says, my dog died, you might use your past experience to be like, oh yeah, I had a pet die too in the past, and you look back at that memory and you understand how it made you feel, but you're not actually mirroring their emotions. You're finding a balance between your experiences and theirs that allows you to somewhat understand their emotional state. And your brain is converting that into an emotional feeling. So you will feel a sense of what they are feeling. You will feel your version of sadness. Now, maybe your pet was not super close to you, and you were kind of like, oh, I didn't want it to die, but it wasn't the end of the world, and they were extremely close to their pet, so it could be an entirely different language of understanding between the two. Now, because of this, you have a certain position where it's beneficial to have that, and then you have many scenarios where it's not beneficial to be mirroring someone's emotions. Again, the homeless person in this past example. You don't want to mirror their emotions because the only thing it can do is cause you to lose. And by lose, I mean you give them something. You give what you have to them because that's the only real way that that interaction logically benefits you. I mean, maybe the old man sits you down and he has the wisdom of centuries and gives you a whole new view on life, and it's probably not going to happen. He's probably going to pull out a shiv and shiv you and take your wallet when you open it up and give him a couple bucks. Like, that's just... Statistically, homeless people have a very high level of mental health illness and just all-around drug abuse, poor life choices. So it's more likely that they will cause harm to you than offer some secret pool of wisdom or anything like that. It's not the or the old social experiment meme of you give him 20 bucks and it wasn't a social experiment. He doesn't pull out a checkbook and write you $1 million check for being such a good person. Like, most of the time, it just results in loss on your end. So, logically, you suppress your emotions there. Not your emotions. I mean, in a sense, it's both, but you suppress your empathy. You might recognize that that person is, for example, maybe in the other example I said, it's like a winter storm or something. It's very cold, and this person is on the street, and their well-being is at risk. And everyone is just walking by them, because most people are suppressing their empathy. Maybe you look at them, and you say, well, you know, I have a blanket in my car. I can give him that, or a coat, or whatever, and it is a mild loss for me, but then I will feel better to know that their well-being is somewhat mitigated through the storm. And that's, again, a scenario where you are acting for your own benefit. And that's the key thing that I'm trying to drive home here. Empathy serves to help you. It can help you to have relationships. It can help you to advance yourself in a career. It can help you to just feel good. Helping others can make you feel better because you know that your actions have had a positive impact. And a lot of people draw a lot of value from good deeds. It's why we have charities. It's why people feel that they feel that change. Their empathy makes them feel bad, and then they help someone, reducing that empathy from bad to neutral or positive, and they feel that shift from unhappiness to happiness as a positive in themselves. So even if they were already happy in the beginning, they kind of become accustomed to their own status. What makes you happy will ultimately make you neutral. It'll be what you expect. And that shift, that constant fluctuation, is part of what makes happiness so good to people. Like, it is what makes it desirable. Going from unhappiness to happiness. Any good storytelling will always put the hero down on the back foot, and they'll be having a hard time, and then they'll accomplish their goal, and they'll be very satisfied, and the viewer is watching that shift from unhappiness to happiness, from failure to success. And that movement in that path is what you feel as good. Being static in good or bad will ultimately become neutral. Someone who is just going through a shit life, and you look at them and you're like, how the hell are you, like, how have you not just ended it all? Your life is miserable. They'll just be like, you know, it's life. Like, it's just what it is. Like, this is my life. I've been living it for a long time. I wake up every day and this is it. They don't know what they're missing out on because life has given them... They've only been able to see it in others. They haven't experienced it themselves. And because of that, they get a little bit... They just get a little bit of good, and it's amazing for them because they're going from far into the negative up a little bit closer to the positive, which is a big shift for them. Whereas if you have everything from the moment you were born, you're never going to recognize when someone does something nice for you. I mean, you will, but it's never going to have that same weight. Because it's something you've come to expect. You expect good things because good things happen to you. Psychopathy is just taking that to the final conclusion. The extreme of that spectrum, but the final realization that everything is just a metric of movement. Anything positive is just based on the shift. If you maintain psychopathy, you won't feel bad And by maintain psychopathy, I mean if you suppress your empathy, you won't feel bad when you exploit someone. And that's just that's the reality. That's what the diagnosis is trying to cover. And if you're looking at the world and you're saying the only way that you can make meaningful progress is at someone else's loss, like you have to be taking from someone else because there's only so much in the world. It's the logical outcome. And because of this, psychopathy is less of a measurement of empathetic ability and more of a measurement of intelligence, which is why so many psychopaths do very well in life, because they're very intelligent people who have utilized that intelligence in a way that allows them to interact beneficially for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of others to a degree, because if people are giving you money, people must value what you are doing. If more people are giving you more money, then people value what you're doing more. Success is ultimately humans' way of demonstrating agreed on value. You can say that some writer or storyteller is amazing and their work is very important, but if you're not giving them your money and other people aren't giving them their money, then by every metric, that value is not actually there. You're just saying flowery words because you think it'll make them make more stories or that it'll do something that will allow you to benefit. When you truly value something, you will put money into it. And if not you, someone else will. If something is valuable to all of society, society will finance it. If it's not, then society won't. A psychopath that is leveraging things that people value and giving them enough of that thing that people are willing to finance it is not morally or ethically compromised. They are just utilizing intelligence. And in the same way that intelligence does not guarantee lifelong success, it tends to be a very good indicator. If someone is illiterate and, practically a vegetable as far as cognitive function goes, their success rate in life is probably lower than the depressed genius that doesn't really want to do anything. Like, yes, that is a thing. There are people who become demoralized due to their intelligence. People that look at the things I'm talking about and they say, wow, the whole thing is kind of fucked up, and why would you even want to be a part of that? That's not a non-existent issue. But it's a minority, because most people are selfish. And that's a fact that a lot of people don't want to admit, but it's the truth. Most people don't care if it's not affecting them. Positively, negatively, either way, what's in it for me? So most people who are intelligent will not get stuck into a cycle of depression. They won't get fixated on perfectionism. They'll tend to just perform at a level expected of their intelligence and enjoy that level of success. Psychopaths are in the same boat. Just because they're intelligent, or just because they're leveraging their intelligence to control their emotions, does not mean that they are going to be perfectly satisfied with the way the world is. They may play the game, but they may not like the game. They may just shut down because it's pointless. And I mean that in the sense of, if you accept that humanity is what humanity is, where is the point in trying to change humanity? If you understand at the root of humanity, it's all about personal advancement, irrelevant to the group. The only thing you are doing if you try to change people is you are trying to advance your personal benefit, your idea of what the world should be. Which is exactly what everyone else is guilty of doing. It's pointless. However you cut it, everyone is working towards their own end. And regardless of what those ends are, there is no better or worse. I mean, there are obviously things you can decide are morally superior or ethically superior or inferior. But I mean, ultimately everyone is pursuing their own selfishness. All you're doing by trying to convince people that your selfishness is better than theirs is trying to pursue your own selfishness. You don't have the experience, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the experience to understand what could cause other people to value the things they do, and you don't have the knowledge to correct those experiences. No matter how smart you are, you can be the most brilliant mind on the planet, and the first thing you're going to learn is how little you understand humanity. How little everyone else makes sense. A fool can look at a crowd and say, these people are just like me. They're cheering as I cheer. We're working towards the same goal. A genius will look at that crowd and say, this is a flock of sheep. They don't even know what they're supporting. They're just supporting it because they see others supporting it. Not a single one of them could actually articulate why. And the genius would be statistically more accurate. The only way you can correct these issues is to correct humanity. And by correcting humanity, I mean remove humanity. So psychopaths who are potentially motivated either by personal benefit or by just an understanding of the game, they're in a lose-lose scenario. Either they're perfectly content with the status quo, and then they will just play the game better than everyone else, and everyone will say, how are these people so emotionless and monsters? They're beating us at our own game. Or you're motivated by a stronger sense of morality, and in that case, you just have to shut down your empathy altogether because you understand that there's no way for you to achieve a fairer outcome than what is. In a sense, humanity gets what humanity deserves because humanity shapes its own world. If people keep raising up values that bring harm to themselves and others, then it's no one's place to correct them. You can educate, you can try to teach these people your way of seeing the world, but ultimately, if you accept that psychopathy is a standard across all people, it's just a measure of how much they're willing to ignore, how much harm that they will cause and rationalize as being helpful or good. Education isn't it's the solution, but it won't cure the issue. The cure for the issue is just no more humanity. As long as humans exist, there will be humans who will exploit. As long as humans will exploit, other humans will see that and they will also want the benefits. And as long as people are pursuing the benefits of exploitation, you are going to see all of these negatives. If you allow yourself to be empathetically open, the extreme empath, your life is a living hell. Either that or you are, that's one of the things. Extremely empathetic people also, I should point this out. I should have pointed this out earlier. They tend to be very low intelligence. And that's because the only way you can remain open to people as a default is if you don't have the intelligence to A, understand the struggles other people go through. You see someone who's sad and you go, oh, you're sad, you shouldn't be sad. Here's a nice gesture to make you feel better, and you don't understand the depth of their sadness. You think everything is so superficial because that's the way you feel the world is, the way you see the world, that you think that resolutions can be simple, that there are things, you don't understand that there are things that can't be undone. And a lot of these people it's just something that gets baked into people. Like, most people can understand death. And if you're sad that your pet died, that's a emotion people can understand across the board. People will look at that and say, yeah, I've been there, I understand what's going on. But if you're a low intelligence person, someone says, no, your pet didn't die, they went away. And they're really happy where they went, and everything is good. The low intelligence person will believe that. And if someone tries to tell them otherwise after they are told something like that, telling a child, about the farm their pet went to, they will resist that because it goes against what makes them happy. And they believe the world is a positive thing, so if something is just making them sad, it must be a lie. And the other side of that is also just awareness. You can't be aware of all the shit that has gone down in just recent years. Epstein Island, the cartels, what they do, and just all of it, everything the cartels do. The Middle Eastern never-ending wars. You can't be aware of all of that and be highly empathetic, because eventually you're just going to run out of empathy. The empathy well will come up dry. You'll stop caring, because if you don't, you'll go insane. Now, if you're a low-intelligence person, and you hear about those things, you know they kind of happen, but you never actually process what actually is entailed in those events. You're like, oh, these people are fighting. Well, that's not good. And it never translates to millions of lives have been lost and will continue to be lost. These are people that are dead. They're gone. On top of the whole thing with the afterlife, you have that like safety net that even if the people die, it's not that bad because good things await them after death. You need that level of, I'm just going to call it what it is, you need that level of delusion to exist with that level of empathy. A realist cannot be empathetic towards the world. The world will destroy them. And by the world, I mean humanity. Nature isn't much better, if I'm being totally honest and fair to humanity. Go and look at how most animals interact. It is not a kumbaya, we're all holding hands and singing songs. It's, I'm going to go ahead and eat the offspring of this animal and leave the mother and father alive so that they can make more offspring. Like, nature is pretty fucked up. It's pragmatic. It's result-oriented. Like, things, if you were to see humans do the things that nature does to itself, humanity would look even worse. Human is actually somewhat reserved in our interpersonal interactions compared to nature. If humans were like what other animals in nature, we would nuke ourselves into existence immediately. We're probably going to do that in the long term. Don't get me wrong. That's probably the way the story ends. Because it only takes one unstable nutjob to start launching nukes, and then everyone else is just, what are you holding back for? But if we were as animalistic as lesser animals, and as result-oriented, with as little short-term or long-term valuation, 100%, we would have nuked each other by, like, the moment we had the weapons, we would have started throwing them around and never stopped. It's only by virtue of our intelligence that we created the weapons that will destroy us, and then we went, let's not destroy ourselves yet. Let's wait until, we've exhausted every other potential exploitative path forward. We've gotten as much as we can get out of the game, and then we flip the table. See, you try to play checkers with a pigeon, and it'll just strut around the board like it won, while defecating on it. You try to play checkers with someone who doesn't know how to play checkers, they'll try to win for a little while, and they might flip the board and declare victory or whatever. That's the beauty of intelligence. It gives you that little bit of manipulative awareness. You're able to slightly alter circumstances in a way that might give you a higher perception of self. If you never understand how the game plays, you'll just play the game. If you understand how the game plays and you see you're losing, you might forfeit or rage quit the game. If you are extremely proficient at the game, you will almost always end up lowering your proficiency down to the level of others when dealing with others to maintain social function, which is where you get psychopaths. They operate within the terms that are placed on them by other people because there's no benefit in trying to explain their complex psychology to other people. Some of them have tried. There have been many psychopaths that have written entire books on what goes on in their mind, and then that's why we have the concept of mirroring now. Because for a long time, psychopaths could not feel empathy. And then we had psychopaths saying, no, I am a psychopath. I do all the things that they say psychopaths do. But I have felt deep connection and deep sadness relating to the sadness of other people. And they go, okay, well, they're mirroring so well that they don't even know that they're not really feeling empathy, they're just feeling some mockery of empathy. But the soldier on a battlefield who is killing other humans, they do feel real empathy, just not in that scenario because it doesn't benefit them. You get this whole circular rationalization. No one wants to admit that they were wrong. The psychologists don't want to admit that they're wrong. The psychopaths are in a position where if they admit that they're psychopaths, if they make that a public statement by writing a book on psychopathy, and it becomes not just a private medical diagnosis, but an actual public understanding of their character, then they're going to be looked down on. There's no winning in terms of openly discussing the subject by the experts of it. If the psychologists say, oh no, everyone's a little bit psychopathic, it's just a measure of how far you're willing to go to enrich yourself, everyone's going to look at them and be like, no, you're crazy. I am not a monster. Those people are monsters, not me. No one wants to admit that overlap. So it's just a lose-lose-lose. If the psychopath speaks out, they get condemned because psychopathy is universally condemned. If the psychologist speaks out, they get condemned because people see themselves being compared to something that they have already condemned. And on top of that, one last thing that I want to cover on this, I think I've pretty well made my point clear, but on top of the condemnation, there is also the staggering amount of profit. Now, a lot of this is in the past, but back in the day, you had an entire underbelly of criminal justice, where basically you had the courts, you had the prisons, you had all the things that you associate with criminal justice, but then you had the asylums. And the asylums had two things that they did. One, they allowed any psychopathic nut jobs, any sadists, to do whatever the hell they wanted to those patients. They could take them apart and put them back together if that's what they wanted to do. Just for the shits and giggles of it. And a lot of the, ultimately most of the medical experts of the world understood this. They knew what happened in the asylums. There's a reason they were shut down, and it's because the public started to realize what was going on. And I'm of the mindset that shutting down the asylums is not a good idea, that they are needed. However, key thing here, what allowed them to get away with what they were doing was having psychopaths, having people that could not be reformed by traditional means, so they had to go to an asylum instead of a prison. And because of this, psychopathy was just a kind of blanket term used for anyone that was trying to the person trying to escape prison, because some people were under the mistaken assumption that the asylums would be better than the prisons. They oftentimes were not. And then otherwise, people that they could afford to convince the public were criminally insane, put them in the asylum, and then have the public pay to keep them in the asylum. When in reality, whether or not someone is going to be rehabilitated has little to do with their mental health. And by that I mean, you're just as likely to be able to rehabilitate a psychopath as an average Joe. As I've already explained, there's a lot less difference than most people assume. But the problem comes into play is perception. The public doesn't think there's any point in attempting to rehabilitate a psychopath. So you can throw them in the asylum, leave them there for the rest of their life, and the public will be like, oh yeah, they were insane. That's just how it goes. Like, we can't fix crazy. If you throw someone that the public views as salvageable into one of those scenarios, and even more if that person actually made it out of the asylum and told people what was going on, the public response to that would be very negative. That's why the asylums were shut down. Some people got out of the asylums and discussed their treatment. Electroshock, just all manners of not very nice things. By diagnosing someone with an untreatable condition that's pretty vague, honestly, psychopathy does not have any rich explanation as to why it occurs or the exact process of it. It's just a vague concept. You reduce the chances of any of these people ever being reformed because there's nothing you can reform them to. You can say they feel empathy now and then let them go if you want, but I mean, is there a difference? If they become a normal person and they go about a normal person's life, they're going to be taking part in just as much psychopathic behavior as the psychopath. It's purely a decision on your part to just release them in that arrangement. The risk is so much lower when you can just default a group of the population into an irredeemable monster and then profit from them. Not only profit from them, but also be able to kind of just experiment on them, just to do whatever the hell you want. You can lobotomize them, you can stick electrodes in their brain and fry it. Like, you can do whatever you want to them in that scenario, and the public is just like, yeah, they're sick, they're just trying to help. I mean, one of the other things, you could prostitute them out and, you know, keep them sedated so they just comply and turn your asylum into a brothel. Happened. Real thing. You can look that up yourself. Just talking about psychopathy here. The people that were taking care of the psychopaths were pretty psychopathic. The point is, that becomes a very lucrative and, we'll call it, self-contained system of malice. If you didn't have the asylums for these nut jobs to do whatever the hell they wanted to do to people that are deemed unfit for society, those people would be doing those things outside the asylums. So, in a sense, it's two birds, one stone. Let the psychopaths torture each other, and everyone else is fine. They don't need to know what's going on in there. Obviously, when people found out, they felt it was not the fairest thing. And the reason the people felt it was not the fairest thing was not because empathy. It was because when what went on inside the asylum became public knowledge. The main takeaway people got was that people from the asylums could be misdiagnosed. They could be in there for the wrong reasons. Meaning they themselves, or their children, or their families, or their friends, could one day be in those asylums, and they did not like what was going on in those asylums, so they wanted those to go away. It's a lot of the same logic that people use when they support soft on crime policy. I might need to steal someday, so I don't want to go to prison if I steal. Because I'll only do it for good reasons. But we have to assume everyone's only doing it for good reasons, because if the only reason you would ever steal is for good reasons, then all these people stealing for bad reasons must be actually stealing for good reasons. It's the same kind of, again, rationalization people use. They need their worldview to be consistent. The same reason the asylums were shut down is the reason the asylums should have remained open. Because people can rationalize away any level of wrongdoing as long as they have motive. And the thing that's a little funny is, with the asylum shutting down, we immediately just saw the same problem happening again. First it was the autism epidemic. Everyone on the planet suddenly had autism. This is something that you can break down into, I could probably do a whole video on this, but in the short version, people started getting raised by machines. They started spending most of their time engaging with television, radio, video games, ever-increasing levels of artificial stimulation. And that's where they learned a lot of their social cues from a video game, which has a very simple artificial emotional system. You say bad thing, character reacts badly. Clearly reacts badly, so that even the dumbest person can understand that they did something mean. Then you go to the real world where people are subtle, and they have that level of subtlety to their actions, and they are used to fiction. They're used to games, movies, stories, where everything is just so clear-cut. And they have trouble analyzing, understanding, and interacting with people because they are developmentally stunted, because they've been taught these things in such an artificial way that does not translate to reality. Oh, Big Pharma stepped up and said, ooh, how about a little bit of meth and speed? That'll sort you guys right out. Two drugs that are known to shut down social interaction. To either shut down your desire for social interaction or to shut down your awareness of social interaction. Both of which result in you further declining into a underdeveloped emotional state where you have trouble socializing and interacting with people. Now, if you find someone on your level, suddenly you can interact really well because you're both on the same page. Now, if you're interacting with someone who's fully developed, it's like a child trying to have a grown-up discussion with an adult. Like, it's never going to be on par. The adult tends to not want to take part in that conversation because the child is so immature and unaware. They can't get anything out of it. They're not going to get much stimulant. So you arrange this in such a way that you have an explanation for a naturally occurring phenomenon, you classify it as an illness, and then you treat that illness with drugs that are very cheap to make, cents on the dollar, and then you sell them for hundreds of dollars per pill in some cases. A lot of money is incentivizing this process. Looking back, I am sure going forward people are going to look back at the autism spectrum specifically, and they're going to see that as the same thing with the psychopathic spectrum. Large swaths of humanity dehumanized by a medical diagnosis that allows them to be exploited rampantly by a very psychopathic medical system. A very efficient exploitation system. You can look at any massive sudden spike of mental illness. Anxiety and depression. Wow, would you look at the world? I wonder why people would be anxious or depressed. The threat of World War III and just generally people not being able to human anymore. Poor social interaction and emotional development causing people to have just bad interactions in social environments. Gee, do you think those things might make people anxious or depressed? Nope. It's actually a clinical issue that we need to treat with antidepressants and what is it, Oxycontin for the anxious people? Just mellow them out. Again, two things that are very cheap to make and can be sold for very high prices. I think looking back, our entire medical system and most of our psychology system is going to be seen as worse than the lobotomy craze of the, I think it's 40s through 60s. It might have been 30s through 50s. During that period, everyone was getting a lobotomy. Oh, your wife is nagging you? Get a lobotomy. That'll shut her up. Like, I think it's going to be looked at as a even worse escalation of those issues. Because ultimately, we refuse to acknowledge this fundamental truth. And I'm going to end the video here by once more covering this. Everyone is psychopathic. It's just a question of how effective they are at it. Everyone will choose to pursue personal benefit at the expense of others, so long as the benefit is perceived to be greater than the social loss by the exploitation. If they can frame that exploitation as being beneficial to the other party, they will do anything. Again, it's a low-stakes thing, but to go back to video games, I knew people in MapleStory who would buy items at 10% of their value and sell them at 100% their value, 100 to 95. Sometimes it'd be nice and give the other guy a discount. In any sane world, at that level of range in outcome, a normal person would have to be able to realize that they're conning one or both parties. Humanity is just developed in such a way that sanity isn't actually a factor in those interactions. Psychopathy is not a question of sanity or mental health, it is just a question of intelligence. And if you can get more from less effort, whatever happens outside of that circle that you were profiting from is not your concern. Doesn't matter where it is. Are you working in the military? And I don't mean serving in the military. I mean working in the higher level of the military-industrial complex, arranging wars that cost millions of human lives so that you can sell weapons. Who cares? If the war's not on your home front, it's not your lives that are lost. Like, they were probably going to kill each other either way. These people are not psychopaths. And I mean that in the sense that the people that are arranging these things are not clinically classified as psychopaths. They are, by the meaning of the word, they are 100% the far extreme of clinical psychopathy from my interpretation of it as selective psychopathy. They are as far as you can get in selective psychopathy. And they are also very short-sighted. They arrange these wars and everything else for personal profit, and they don't realize that eventually that comes back around. They're pushing all these wars, and they don't grasp that if World War III happens, it's going to be a war fought with nukes, and there's no bunker on Earth that they can hide in with their profits that will be better than the life they can live with less profits. Slightly less profits. Just, rather than being a trillionaire, just settle for a billionaire. You have a pretty good life in the world today. Now, life as a trillionaire in a bunker, it's a pretty shitty life. Not gonna lie. But that should do it. Psychopathy, misunderstood concept. Everyone is on some level a psychopath. It's just a question of how much you utilize that ability compared to others. People don't like having someone get one better on them, and as a result, they will tend to frame it as them allowing someone else to get one up on them. I didn't mark it less effectively than the psychopath. I simply have ethics and values, and I only fairly buy at 20% under market and sell at 100. A very reasonable exchange. I am a good person. The psychopath is the one who's buying a 10% and flipping for 95. Like that guy, he's a monster. Me, I was just taking a little off the top. You get it? I hope. If this video does well, I'm probably going to post it on other platforms. I do want to cover many other subjects. I brought up for a very short time sadism and masochism. That's another one that is highly misunderstood. In its extreme, obviously it's bad. Both are bad. They're neither of them are good things for people to have when taken to the extreme. But, well, again, I'll save it for that video, but it's not that black and white. For all the bad that happens under sadism, it also is essential for growth and creation. People have to destroy to understand, at least at the highest level. You learn by taking apart, and if the thing you're taking apart is, say, a person, that might be considered a little sadistic, but the pursuit of knowledge. For now, I'll leave this one here. It's already a fairly long video, and I've only just dipped my toes into the actual subject. If I was able to actually have a formal debate with someone who was not acting out of confirmation bias. I'm sure there's much more productive discussions that can be had on psychopathy, but unfortunately, it's always an uncontested, or not really uncontested, but unaccepted statement to declare that humanity is psychopathic by default. That it's just a measure of how far they are willing to go and how much they are willing to bend the rules of morality and ethics as long as it benefits them. There's very few people that will have this discussion from the other side with any sense of willingness to compromise, ironically enough. One of those things that psychopaths are accused of not being able to do. They're unwilling to compromise, and they will take short-term victories at long-term losses purely because they won't compromise. Almost like maintaining a improper diagnosis or understanding of a diagnosis because it disagrees with your current understanding, even if it potentially results in long-term misunderstanding. But hey, that's just me. If I make more videos, I'll see you then. If not, it's been good.